Right now, somewhere in the Saudi Arabian desert, over $50 billion worth of construction sits half-finished and waiting to be repurposed. 6,000 of the largest foundation piles ever built on Earth are buried under the sand. They were designed to hold up a mirrored utopia where 9 million people would live. Instead, they are about to hold up server racks. Saudi Arabia spent $50 billion trying to build a science fiction city and accidentally created the world's most expensive foundation for an AI data farm. At the center of this story is one question that explains everything. What happens when one man spends $50 billion and nobody is allowed to tell him it is impossible? In 2017, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stood in front of the world and announced NEOM, not a city, a region, the size of Belgium, carved from empty desert on the kingdom's Red Sea coast. The centerpiece was called The Line, 2 parallel walls of mirrored glass, 500 meters tall, stretching 170 kilometers in a straight line from the coast deep into the mountains. No cars, no roads, no carbon emissions. 9 million residents by 2045. The promotional videos were stunning. Flying taxis, robot butlers. Lush gardens suspended inside a glass canyon. Hundreds of millions of people watched. The announced budget was $500 billion, and the world's biggest architecture and engineering firms lined up to take the contracts. AECOM, Bechtel, McKinsey. Dozens of Western firms sent their best people to the desert. American and European architects relocated their families to a remote construction camp 170 kilometers from the nearest city. Everyone wanted to be part of the most ambitious construction project in human history. But inside those design meetings, something else was happening. One former planner told the Financial Times that exhibitions for the Crown Prince were defined by one word: fear. When engineers told him a 100-meter structure would be more realistic, he insisted it had to be 500 meters tall and 200 meters across. People would just mimic whatever he had to say. The people building the line knew from the beginning that the numbers did not work. They built it anyway, because nobody could tell him no. Here is where the scale becomes difficult to believe. The line does not cross flat terrain. Its route runs through 3 completely different environments: hard mountain rock, soft, shifting desert sand, and salty, unstable coastal plains. To create a uniform foundation across all of that, engineers designed one of the most ambitious structural systems ever attempted. An automated factory was built on site to produce 32-meter-long rebar cages. 60 piling rigs operated around the clock, drilling 60 to 65 piles per day. 6,000 piles total, each 2.5 to 3 meters in diameter. Some of the largest foundation piles ever constructed anywhere in the world. Every single one of them was designed to last 1,000 years. They have been in the ground for less than 5 years, and the people drilling those piles were not engineers from London or architects from New York. They were migrant workers, mostly from South Asia, working 16-hour shifts in 50-degree heat, 14 days straight, with 3-hour unpaid bus commutes that left them with roughly 4 hours of sleep. The foundation work cost several $billion. It covered only the first section. At the surface, NEOM was consuming 20% of the world's available structural steel. Satellite images show a desert transformed into a massive construction zone. But the physics were working against the project in ways that no amount of money or steel could fix. 2 500-meter walls of mirrored glass in 50-degree desert heat create enormous thermodynamic stress every single day. Wind loads across a flat surface, 170 kilometers long at that height, are a problem no engineering team has ever solved. The Financial Times interviewed more than 20 former architects, engineers, and senior executives who worked on the line. Their conclusion was unanimous. The project, as designed, was physically impossible, and the true cost to build what was promised was not $500 billion. Internal analyses put it closer to $9 trillion. For context, the entire United States interstate highway system, adjusted for inflation, cost roughly $600 billion. The line would have cost 15 times more than the largest infrastructure project in American history. That is not a construction budget. That is a number that has never existed in infrastructure. So the engineers knew it could not be built. The real cost was 15 times what was announced. And the man funding the whole thing would not accept a smaller version. That is how you spend $50 billion and end up with nothing. The internal reviews came in 2024, and the numbers were devastating. The world was promised 170 kilometers of mirrored city. What could actually be delivered by 2030 was 2.4 kilometers. That is not a city. That is not even a neighborhood. It is shorter than a single runway at JFK, a 99% reduction in scope. And then the money started disappearing. Brent crude dropped to just above $60 a barrel, well below the price Saudi Arabia needs to balance its budget. And at the same time, the kingdom committed billions to hosting the 2030 World Expo and the 2034 FIFA World Cup. The Public Investment Fund, the nearly $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund chaired by the Crown Prince himself, came under pressure to show returns. The fund's 5-year strategy was up for renewal, and NEOM had produced nothing but expenses. In mid-2025, 35% of construction workers were laid off. Over 1,000 employees, many of them the same Western professionals who had moved their families to the desert, were relocated back to Riyadh. They kept their salaries but lost their housing and meals, a pay cut for a dream that was dying. The chief executive officer stepped down, and one former employee, speaking anonymously, summarized the situation in a sentence that tells you everything about what went wrong from the very beginning. Everyone knows the project will not work. The challenge now is letting the Crown Prince down gently. That is the answer to the question at the center of this story. What happens when nobody can tell one man no? You spend $50 billion. You employ 100,000 people. You consume 1/5 of the world's steel. And then you quietly try to figure out how to let him down gently. In late January 2026, the Financial Times reported that the Crown Prince has finally accepted his vision will become something far smaller. Architects have been given a new assignment. Not to build the mirrored city the world was promised, but to find the least wasteful use for the billions of dollars of infrastructure already in the ground. And the answer is one that nobody predicted when those foundation piles were being drilled. Data centers. The line sits on the Red Sea coast, and salt water can be used for cooling, one of the most expensive challenges in running massive server farms. Saudi Arabia has abundant solar energy, and the global AI boom has created what appears to be limitless demand for computing infrastructure. Here is where the story comes back to America. Meta, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are all spending tens of billions of dollars searching for places to build data center campuses. They need power, cooling, and land. NEOM has all three: the foundations, the roads, the utilities that American and European firms helped build as the skeleton of a utopian city may now become the platform for American tech companies to run their AI operations. The same Western firms that took the contracts, moved their people to the desert, and watched the project unravel could end up doing business on the same patch of sand, just for a completely different purpose. Meanwhile, every other piece of NEOM is being quietly dismantled. Trajana, the mountain ski resort that was supposed to host the 2029 Asian Winter Games on synthetic snow in the desert, had those games indefinitely postponed weeks ago. The resort is being downsized. Oxagon, the floating industrial hub, is being rescoped. The entire NEOM project has been recalibrated from a mission to show the world the future to a mission to stop the bleeding. NEOM is not just a cautionary tale about one country or one man. It is a warning about what happens everywhere when the person writing the checks is the last person anyone is willing to challenge. The engineers knew. The architects knew. The executives knew. The math was public. The physics were obvious. And $50 billion was spent anyway, because the system around one man made it easier to keep building the impossible than to walk into a room and say it will not work. Over $50 billion is now embedded in that desert. Thousands of foundation piles designed for a mirrored utopia sit beneath the sand. And instead of holding up a city where 9 million people were supposed to live, work, and never need a car, they may end up holding the server racks that train the next generation of artificial intelligence. Saudi Arabia set out to build the future. And in a way, they did. Just not the one that anyone in that room was too afraid to say was never going to happen.